I'm Mike Tabor, Professor of Education here at Carter College and class of 1986. My Nano block is called What's on the Bottom of the Cube, and this is a lesson that I do with my students in our research design course here in education. And it's a really good illustration of the different forms of reasoning, inductive, deductive, and abductive, that we often encounter when doing research. We're going to show you what the sides are, and then you're welcome to pause the video to try to see if you can figure out what's on the bottom. But almost always the first pattern that people see is the background. Here is, this is blank, that's a grid, this is grid, that's dots, therefore the bottom must be dots. This is really one of those good examples of sort of that deductive thinking, where they are seeing patterns that lead to pretty clear conclusions, and they use that premise to solve the problem, which is on the bottom. And now I see the shapes, which is obvious because I know what those are. So I have a heart, I have a heart, I have a crescent, I have a crescent, I have a triangle, I must have a triangle, and you can see how they're building off that sort of form of deductive thinking where there's premises about the opposite sides here. And usually when I ask the students at this point, how certain are you? They're going to say, we're very certain. So they start getting a little bit curious about what's different about the shape. An empty, filled in, filled in, must be empty on the bottom. And so they go, oh, it's a triangle, but it's a triangle that's not filled in. And I said, well, you've created a second premise here that when it involves a shape, the opposite is true. Looking at this, and the letter starts to come up, and what you do is you begin to introduce some complexity to what is happening here, because clearly G and D have no sense in the world of our deductive thinking of being opposite. So what happens is I see often a shift of the students. We're moving away from deductive to inductive, where we're starting to think about possibilities. When you're thinking about reasoning and processes, about how important it is to draw from prior information, which is a really good way of introducing them to thinking inductively, which is, well, what else has been done in the past? How can we draw from that knowledge? Well, we know the alphabet, we can draw from that knowledge. And they have a lot of dialogue and discussion because it's human nature to look for patterns. And in our reasoning, that's what we like to do. We like to look for patterns. In science, we look for patterns. What's the data tell us? And this is where we start saying this is a beautiful example of that form of inductive reasoning, because we've reached an idea here, a hypothesis perhaps, or even a theory about what's on the bottom. And so now we move into the third phase of reasoning that I really want to push my students into, abductive, where we've got to start thinking a lot more creativity. We need to start pulling knowledge from other areas, because maybe the heart has something to do with Valentine's Day. Maybe the crescent has something to do with the phase of the moon we're in right now. You know, this all challenges students to think a little bit differently and outside, which is really what I try to get them to do, is think differently about the cube. What's the pattern? Where am I certain and uncertain? What are possibilities that could happen if we had more cubes to study? And then I take the cube away, and they can't see the bottom. And that's what we try to do in our research classes, try to get the students to think about the process of doing research, way more important than did we actually find an absolute truth.